Still clashes in the misty valleys of Wales. What does it truly take to break the spirit of a nation? This is the untold story of the Welsh Wars, a centuries-long struggle where legendary princes and ruthless kings fought for the soul of a country. By the end of this journey, you will know the 30 key battles that decided the fate of a people. We will uncover how a victorious prince vanished without a trace and why the greatest English king was humbled by Welsh weather. What is the one battle you believe could have changed everything? The year 1081 marked a turning point in the Welsh struggle. Far from the borders with England, a different kind of war was being fought, a civil war that would decide who had the right to lead the Welsh people. On the slopes of Myned Carn, two rival Welsh princes, Trehearn ap Caradog and Caradog ap Griffith, marched with their armies, confident in their strength. They sought to crush the remaining opposition and claim all of Wales for themselves, but waiting for them was a clever alliance, a partnership forged not just for battle, but for the future of the nation. Gruffydd ap Cynan, a prince with a claim to the northern kingdom of Gwynedd, and Rhys ap Tudor, the rightful ruler of the southern kingdom of Deheubarth, had joined forces. They were outnumbered and they knew a direct assault would be their end, so they chose their ground with brilliant care. Myned Carn was not an open field. It was a place of high ground, rocky outcrops, and difficult approaches. The Allied army positioned itself so that Trehearn and Caradog would have to attack uphill, over broken terrain that broke their formations and sapped their energy. Imagine trying to charge up a steep, stony hillside while your enemy stands ready at the top. The battle was fierce and chaotic, but the strategic advantage proved decisive. The forces of Trehearn and Caradog were shattered. Both rival princes fell in the fighting, their ambition ending on that Welsh mountainside. The victory at Myned Carn was more than just a military success. It was a political earthquake. Gruffydd ap Cynan secured his throne in Gwynedd, founding a dynasty that would last for generations. Rhys ap Tudor was firmly established as the king of Deheubarth. For a brief, precious period, Wales was stabilized under native rule, free from the internal squabbling that had made it vulnerable. This was not a victory over the English, but a victory for Wales itself, a moment where its leaders united to decide their own destiny. Yet this hard-won stability was fragile. The dynasties born from this one battle would soon face a threat from the east far greater than any they had faced from each other. This fragile peace shattered with the death of a king far away in England. King Henry I died without a clear heir, plunging his realm into a bitter civil war known as the Anarchy. For the Norman lords entrenched along the Welsh border, this was a signal to act. They saw a chance to expand their power, to push deeper into the Welsh kingdoms of the south, while the English crown was too distracted to stop them. They moved to seize Ceredigion, a rich coastal region, believing the Welsh were too divided to resist. They were utterly wrong. Their aggression ignited a firestorm. The princes of Gwynedd in the north, their own power now secure, saw the chaos in England not as a threat, but as a historic opportunity. They marched south not as raiders, but as leaders of a unified Welsh uprising. The two armies met near Cardigan on the slopes of a hill called Crugmawr. On one side stood the flower of Norman chivalry, their heavy cavalry a terrifying sight, a wall of steel and horseflesh designed to smash through any line. Facing them were the Welsh spearmen, disciplined and standing firm on the high ground. The Norman knights charged, confident they could sweep these infantry from the field. But the Welsh lines held. They absorbed the shock of the charge, their long spears proving deadly against the armored horses. Then the Welsh turned their own terrain against the invaders. They began to push back, driving the disorganized knights down the slope. The Norman retreat became a rout, a frantic scramble toward the one barrier they thought might save them, the River Teifi. It became their tomb. Pressed from behind by the victorious Welsh, the heavily armored knights were driven into the deep, fast-flowing waters. Many drowned, pulled under by the weight of their own mail, their ambition ending in the river's cold embrace. The victory at Crugmawr was a thunderclap. It was not a skirmish, but a full-scale battle where Welsh forces had decisively defeated the best their enemy could offer. The immediate result was the expulsion of Norman power from much of Ceredigion, but the true impact ran deeper. For the first time in generations, Welsh morale soared. They had proven to themselves that they could stand together and win. The dream of a Wales free from foreign rule, born at Myned Carn, now burned brighter than ever. But such a brilliant flame was bound to attract a powerful and ruthless response. That brilliant Welsh flame now attracted a king who believed he could extinguish it forever. Henry II of England was a ruler of immense power and ambition, a man who commanded an empire stretching from the Scottish borders to the Pyrenees. He saw the rising power of Owain Glyndŵr in the north not as a nuisance, but as a direct challenge to his royal authority. In the summer of 1157, Henry marched into Wales with the largest English army seen in a generation, a formidable force meant to crush Owain and demonstrate once and for all who was the master of Britain. His goal was straightforward: to bring the Prince of Gwynedd to his knees. Owain, however, was a master of a different kind of warfare. He refused to meet the English king on an open field where Henry's knights and archers would have the advantage. Instead, he drew the invading army deeper into his own territory, into a landscape of dense, ancient forests and narrow passes where numbers meant less than knowledge. The critical moment came in the thick woods near Coleshill. Henry's army was stretched out in a long column, struggling through the difficult terrain. His vanguard, pushing ahead, moved right into a carefully laid trap. From the shadows of the trees, Owain's warriors launched their ambush. They knew every path and every hiding place. The English knights, encumbered by their heavy armor and unable to form proper battle lines in the close quarters, were thrown into chaos. The fighting was fierce and brutal at close range. The Welsh, fighting on their own terms, targeted the leadership of the column. In the confusion, King Henry himself was nearly captured, his life saved only by the desperate fighting of his closest retainers. It was a moment of sheer terror for the most powerful man in Britain, a king humbled by the terrain and the tactics of his enemy. The paradox of Coleshill lies in its aftermath. Henry II did eventually force a political submission from Owain. The prince, recognizing he could not defeat the entire English empire in a long war, offered a token surrender to get the king to leave. But every soldier in both armies knew the truth. Tactically, the battle was a clear Welsh victory. Henry had been outmaneuvered, his army bloodied, and his own person put in mortal danger. The battle proved a crucial lesson that no matter how powerful the English king, the Welsh mountains and forests were a defender's greatest weapon. For Owain Glyndŵr, Coleshill was not a defeat but a triumph. His reputation was cemented as the prince who had stared down the English lion and made it flinch. He had shown that even the greatest of kings could be defied. This hard-earned lesson, however, would be tested by a new kind of enemy, one who learned from Henry's mistakes and would prove far more adaptable and relentless. Henry II refused to accept the lesson of Coleshill. 8 years later, he returned to Wales with a vengeance, assembling the largest invasion force the country had ever seen. This was not merely an army, it was a statement of absolute power, a colossal machine of war designed to grind the Welsh principalities into dust once and for all. His target was the heart of Welsh resistance in Gwynedd, and he was determined to leave nothing in his path. The Welsh princes, however, had learned their own lessons from the past. Faced with this overwhelming force, they did something unprecedented. They formed a grand coalition. Rivals and neighbors, including the sons of Owain Glyndŵr and the Lord Rhys of Deheubarth, put aside their differences to face the common enemy. Their strategy was one of absolute denial. They implemented a scorched earth policy, burning their own crops, destroying food stores, and driving livestock deep into the mountains. They left a barren, desolate landscape for the English to march through, a wasteland that could not sustain a massive army. As Henry's host pushed into the Ceiriog Valley, they were met not with a wall of shields, but with a wall of nature itself. The late summer weather turned against them, bringing relentless rain that turned tracks into quagmires. The narrow valley became a death trap, its steep wooded slopes perfect for the constant harassing attacks from Welsh skirmishers. The English column, stretched for miles, was slowly starving and being bled dry by 1,000 small cuts. The grand battle Henry sought never happened. There was no glorious clash of armies, only a miserable, grinding halt. His men were cold, hungry, and demoralized, picked off by an enemy they could rarely see. The mightiest army in Britain was being defeated by the land itself. Facing the complete collapse of his campaign from hunger and disease, Henry had no choice but to order a full, humiliating retreat. The Battle of Crogen is a mystery because the main event was the battle that never was. Its significance is profound. Henry's failure proved that no matter how large or well-equipped an English army was, the Welsh could nullify its advantage through unity, strategy, and their intimate knowledge of the terrain. A direct, large-scale invasion was simply not a viable way to conquer Wales. This strategic stalemate forced a shift in English thinking, setting the stage for a much longer, more subtle war of castles and control. The stalemate at Crogen did not end the war, it simply changed the battlefield. The conflict shifted from vast armies clashing in the valleys to a grinding war of castles and control along the Welsh marches. Here, stone fortresses became the new symbols of power, and their capture was the ultimate prize. Decades after the Great Standoff, one aging Welsh prince proved he still knew how to seize that prize. The Lord Rhys of Deheubarth, the same prince who had helped unite Wales against Henry II, was now in his later years. His world had turned inward, consumed by bitter conflict with his own sons and relentless pressure from the Norman marcher lords who were always probing for weakness. They saw an old ruler beset by family strife and believed his power was fading. They were about to learn how wrong they were. In the year 1196, the Lord Rhys launched a campaign that would remind everyone of his formidable reputation. His target was Payne's Castle, a formidable Norman stronghold built in Radnorshire to dominate the Central March. This was not a mere raiding party, it was a calculated strike at the heart of English authority in the region. The castle was a statement in stone, and Rhys intended to erase that statement. The siege was a masterclass in medieval warfare. Rhys's forces surrounded the fortress, cutting it off from any hope of relief. They would have used a combination of direct assault and siege engines, perhaps even mining, digging tunnels to undermine the castle walls. The defenders, confident in their stone walls, were overwhelmed by the determination and skill of the Welsh assault. Payne's Castle fell, and its capture sent a shockwave through the marches. To understand the importance of this, you have to see a castle as more than just a building. It was a police station, a military base, and a tax collection point all in one. By taking Payne's Castle, the Lord Rhys was not just winning a battle, he was reclaiming a piece of his homeland. He was reasserting Welsh law and ejecting a foreign administration from the land. This victory, late in his life and career, was a powerful symbol. It proved that even with internal struggles, the Welsh spirit of resistance was far from broken. For a brief, brilliant moment, the Lord Rhys had reversed the Norman advance, showing that the marcher lords were not invincible behind their walls. Yet this triumph, like so many in Wales, was fleeting. It was the last great blaze of a dying fire, a final demonstration of what unity and determination could achieve, just as a new and even greater storm was gathering to the east. That final blaze of defiance at Payne's Castle was not the end of the Lord Rhys's campaign. In that same year, 1196, the old prince gathered his forces once more, his eyes set on the region of Malionid. This was a direct challenge to one of the most powerful Norman lords, Roger de Mortimer, a man whose very name was a symbol of English encroachment. Rhys was not just raiding, he was reclaiming, marching his army into the heart of Mortimer's domain to prove that Welsh authority still held power. The two forces met near the town of Radnor. The battle itself was a brutal, close-quarters affair, a swirling melee where the discipline of the Welsh spearmen met the heavy cavalry of the marcher lords. There was no clever ambush this time, just the grim, hard work of shield walls and spear thrusts. The outcome remained shrouded in the mist of time, likely a hard-fought stalemate where neither side could claim a decisive victory. Yet in the context of a relentless war of attrition, a stalemate against a foe like Mortimer was a victory in itself. The campaign secured for a short and precious period Welsh control over the territory, a final assertion of sovereignty from a legendary leader. But this was the last campaign of the Lord Rhys. His death soon after marked the end of an era. The kingdom of Deheubarth, which he had fought so long to build and defend, did not survive him. It fragmented into pieces, consumed by the very internal rivalries that had always been Wales's greatest weakness. The powerful flame of unity he represented was extinguished, leaving behind only embers. And from those embers, a new and even more formidable fire would eventually rise, not from the south, but from the misty mountains of the north. With the passing of the Lord Rhys, the flame of Welsh resistance flickered low in the south. But in the northern kingdom of Gwynedd, a different kind of fire was igniting. This was not a war against a foreign invader, but a brutal family struggle for a crown. The death of the great Owain Glyndŵr had left a bitter legacy, a kingdom divided and fought over by his many sons. For decades, the land was torn apart by their squabbling, a civil war that weakened Gwynnedd from within. The question was not if a new leader would emerge, but who it would be and whether they could harness this chaos into strength. The answer came from an unexpected quarter, not from one of Owain's sons, but from his grandson. His name was Llewellyn ab Iorwerth. While his uncles Dafydd and Rhodri fought each other for the shattered pieces of their father's kingdom, Llewellyn was building his own power base. He was young, ambitious, and possessed a political cunning that his elders sorely lacked. He saw their conflict not as a problem, but as an opportunity. The moment of truth arrived in the year 1199. Llewellyn marched his army to confront his uncle, Dafydd, the ruler of the western part of Gwynedd. They met near the mouth of the Conwy River, a place of immense strategic importance. Here stood the great Cistercian Abbey of Aberconwy, a center of both spiritual and political power. Controlling this site meant controlling the gateway to the heart of Gwynedd. The battle itself was a sharp, decisive clash. Llewellyn's forces, likely more motivated and better led, overwhelmed Dafydd's army. The victory was complete. Dafydd was stripped of his lands and forced into exile, his power broken forever. With this one engagement, Llewellyn seized control of western Gwynedd. But the Battle of Aberconwy was about so much more than territory. It was the masterstroke that announced a new era. By defeating his most powerful uncle at such a symbolic location, Llewellyn demonstrated he was the dominant force in the north. He did not stop there. With a combination of military force and shrewd diplomacy, he would go on to subdue his other rivals, one by one, piecing the kingdom of Gwynedd back together. This battle was the crucial first step on his path to becoming Llewellyn the Great, the prince who would unite most of Wales under his authority. He proved that the real power in Wales was no longer in the fractured south, but in the newly forged strength of the north. And this new united power would soon look beyond its own borders, toward a confrontation with an English crown that was itself entering a period of unprecedented weakness. The resurgence of Gwynedd under Llewellyn the Great created a new Welsh power, but it was his grandson who would forge that power into a nation. Llewellyn ap Gruffydd, the last native prince of Wales, did not inherit a stable kingdom. He had to fight for it, and his campaign in the summer of 1257 would prove his genius. The English hold on South Wales seemed unshakable, a chain of castles and garrisoned towns. Yet Llewellyn saw weakness. He marched his army south, not as a raider but as a liberator, rallying the local Welsh lords to his banner. The English response was swift. A powerful Norman relief force, sent to break the siege of Dynford Castle, marched confidently through the rolling hills. They never reached their destination. Llewellyn had chosen his ground with perfect care near the old church of Llandeilo Fawr. His army lay in wait, hidden from view. As the English column moved through a narrow pass, the Welsh struck from the high ground. The ambush was a textbook execution of tactical warfare. The Norman knights, trapped in the confined space, could not form their dreaded cavalry charge. They were surrounded and cut down. The entire relief force was destroyed. This was not a skirmish, it was a massacre that broke English military power in the region overnight. The road to the south was now wide open. With the victory at Llandeilo Fawr, the entire strategic picture changed. Welsh lords who had been hesitant now flocked to Llewellyn's cause. The English, reeling from the defeat, scrambled to assemble a new, larger army to reclaim their lost territories. They placed their hopes in a seasoned marcher, Lord Stephen Bozen. His mission was simple and brutal: march into the heart of the rebellion and crush it. Bozen led a formidable host of knights and men at arms deep into Carmarthenshire. Llewellyn, now joined by the resurgent princes of Deheubarth, watched his advance. They chose the battlefield at Cymarow, a place of slopes and marshes that would nullify the English advantage in heavy cavalry. As Bozen's army moved across this difficult ground, the Welsh forces descended upon them from two sides. It was a coordinated hammer blow. The English, already struggling with the terrain, were caught completely by surprise and enveloped. The fighting was fierce but one-sided. Stephen Bozen himself was killed and his army was annihilated. The two battles of Llandeilo Fawr and Cymarow, fought in quick succession, were more than just military victories. They were a political earthquake. In a matter of months, Llewellyn ap Gruffydd had shattered English dominance in South Wales. Castles fell, territories were reclaimed, and his authority was recognized from the peaks of Snowdonia to the shores of the Severn Sea. He was no longer just the Prince of Gwynedd, he was the undisputed leader of a resurgent Wales. This hard-won unity, however, would soon face its ultimate test against a king who was as ruthless as he was determined. Llewellyn ap Gruffudd's stunning victories in the south did not go unnoticed in England. A bitter civil war was tearing the English kingdom apart, pitting the rebellious barons under Simon de Montfort against the forces of King Henry III. For a lesser prince, this would have been a time for caution, but for Llewellyn, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. He saw the chaos not as a threat, but as a weapon. He forged a powerful alliance with de Montfort, and with his English rivals distracted, he struck with breathtaking speed. His first target was Hawarden Castle, a formidable Norman stronghold that guarded the northern approaches to Wales. The attack was a masterpiece of surprise and audacity. In a lightning assault, Llewellyn's forces swept down upon the castle before its defenders even knew a war had begun. The garrison, caught completely off guard, was overwhelmed. The capture of Hawarden sent a shockwave through the entire march, proving that even the strongest English fortresses were now vulnerable. This was only the opening move. The English response was led by Roger de Mortimer, the most powerful and feared of the Marcher lords. He gathered a large army, determined to crush Llewellyn and restore royal authority. The two forces met near the town of Montgomery in a rare, set-piece battle on an open field. This was a tremendous risk for Llewellyn, facing the dreaded English heavy cavalry in a direct confrontation. But the Welsh prince had chosen his ground well. The battle was a brutal, swirling melee of charging knights and steadfast spearmen. Llewellyn's forces, fighting with the confidence of their recent triumphs, held firm against the initial cavalry charges. Then they began to push back. The fighting was fierce and personal, a chaotic struggle where the fate of Wales hung in the balance. When the dust settled, it was Roger de Mortimer's army that was broken and in retreat. The victory was total. The most powerful lord on the border had been decisively defeated in open battle. The political gains from these two engagements were immense. With King Henry III weakened and desperate, Llewellyn held all the power. The resulting Treaty of Montgomery was not a negotiated peace, it was a Welsh triumph. For the first and only time in history, an English king formally recognized a native ruler as the Prince of Wales. This was not an empty title, it came with a massive expansion of Llewellyn's territories, cementing his control over much of the country. He had skillfully used England's internal conflict to achieve what decades of warfare had not: official recognition of a sovereign Wales. Yet this hard-won glory contained the seeds of its own downfall. The very English king who had been forced to grant this treaty would soon be succeeded by a son who viewed it not as a settlement, but as an insult to be avenged. The triumph of the Treaty of Montgomery was a fragile thing, built on an English king's moment of weakness. When that king died, his son saw the agreement not as a binding peace, but as a personal grievance. Edward I was a warrior king of immense ambition and resources, a man who would not tolerate a sovereign Prince of Wales. In the spring of 1282, he launched his final solution, a massive, multi-pronged invasion designed to crush Llewellyn ap Gruffudd once and for all. His strategy was relentless, squeezing Gwynedd from the east and the south while his masterstroke unfolded in the north. He had captured the island of Anglesey, the breadbasket of Wales, and now planned to bridge the Menai Strait, that narrow but treacherous strip of water separating the island from the mainland. From there, his army would pour into the heart of Llewellyn's domain. It was a brilliant plan, and it was about to end in disaster. The English engineers, a marvel of medieval logistics, constructed a pontoon bridge of boats lashed together, creating a precarious path across the swift currents. A force of heavily armored knights and men-at-arms began to cross, confident that their technological prowess had outsmarted the Welsh. They were wrong. Llewellyn's brother, Dafydd, was waiting. He understood the strait's deadly nature far better than the English. His forces did not meet the invaders on the far shore, but attacked them in their moment of greatest vulnerability, while they were still in the water and struggling through the deep mud of the landing points. The Welsh used small, flat-bottomed boats, perfect for navigating the shallow, tricky waters. They swarmed the clumsy English vessels and the makeshift bridge, hurling spears and raining arrows down on the disorganized mass of soldiers. The English knights, weighed down by their chainmail and plate armor, were trapped. Those who fell from the boats or the bridge were dragged under by the weight of their own equipment. Those who reached the shore found themselves sinking into the mire, unable to form a defensive line, becoming easy targets for the Welsh who attacked from the firm ground. It was not a battle, it was a slaughter. The entire English force was annihilated, a total defeat that sent a shockwave through Edward's entire war machine. The Battle of Moel Waedan was a stunning demonstration that Welsh tactical brilliance could still overcome overwhelming English might. It temporarily halted Edward's advance and proved that even in this final desperate war, the Welsh were a formidable enemy who could turn the very landscape against an invader. But this glorious victory created a dangerous illusion, one that would lure the last Prince of Wales toward a fateful and final confrontation. The stunning victory at Moel Waedan proved a costly illusion. Llewellyn ap Gruffudd, believing the tide of war had turned, left the safety of Snowdonia. He moved south into the region of Brycheiniog, a land of wooded hills and deep valleys. His goal was to rally the local Welsh lords to rekindle the fires of rebellion and open a new front against the English king. It was a desperate gamble, one that would hinge on the loyalty of fickle allies. The prince traveled with only a small escort, a fraction of his army. The main body of his forces was positioned some distance away, guarding the strategic approaches. This division of his strength would prove fatal. He was lured into a trap, not by Edward's main army, but by the cunning of the Marcher lords who knew the land and its people. They had secured the defection of local Welsh leaders, men who promised Llewellyn support only to betray him. On that cold December day, near the town of Bilthwells, the prince and his small retinue found themselves isolated. A force of English men at arms and their Welsh allies, led by men like Roger Lestrange and John Gifford, had been waiting. They moved to block his retreat, positioning themselves at a place called Owain Bridge. This crossing was the key to the entire valley, the only practical route for Llewellyn to rejoin his main army. The prince sent most of his personal guard, his most trusted warriors, to secure the bridgehead while he prepared to follow. It was in that moment of separation that the ambush was sprung. A separate detachment of Marcher soldiers, likely led by local Welsh guides who knew the hidden paths, forded the icy river Irfon upstream. They emerged from the woods behind Llewellyn's position, cutting him off from his own men at the bridge. What followed was not a grand battle, but a brutal, confused skirmish in the winter woods. The prince was caught unprepared. He was not dressed in the distinctive armor of a ruler, perhaps to avoid drawing attention during his secretive journey. In the chaos of the fighting, he was struck down. The man who had been formally recognized as the Prince of Wales died on a muddy riverbank, surrounded by strangers. His killers did not even know who he was at first. His identity was only confirmed later, a final crushing indignity. The death of Llewellyn ap Gruffudd was more than the loss of a leader. It was the shattering of a nation's dream. With him died the hope of a unified, independent Wales. The heart went out of the Welsh resistance in an instant. His brother Dafydd, the hero of Moel Waedan, would try to continue the fight, but without Llewellyn, the cause was already lost. The light that had blazed so brightly was extinguished, plunging Wales into a despair from which it would not recover for centuries. The war was not yet over, but its soul had been torn out on the banks of the Irfon. With Llewellyn dead and his dreams shattered, the war had one last grim chapter to write. His brother Dafydd ap Gruffudd was now the sole figurehead of Welsh resistance, a prince without a principality, a leader inheriting a cause already lost. He retreated to the one place that still offered a semblance of safety and defiance, the formidable mountain fortress of Castle Waibera. Built by his uncle Llewellyn the Great high in the rugged terrain of Meirionydd, this castle was a masterpiece of Welsh military architecture. It was not a single towering keep, but a complex of strongholds clinging to a rocky outcrop, its walls following the natural contours of the land, making it a nightmare to assault. Here, surrounded by the peaks of southern Gwynedd, Dafydd made his final stand. The English war machine, however, did not pause. In the spring of 1283, King Edward's army arrived at the gates of Castle Waibera. This was no mere raiding party, it was a full siege force equipped with the latest in medieval technology. They brought massive siege engines, great wooden catapults called trebuchets, which could hurl stones weighing hundreds of pounds to smash the castle walls from a safe distance. The siege was a methodical, brutal process of annihilation. The English engineers set up their artillery and began a constant, thunderous bombardment. Day and night, heavy stones crashed against the castle's defenses, while archers poured arrows into the inner wards, making any movement perilous. The Welsh defenders, though fiercely determined, were hopelessly outnumbered and outgunned. They fought from the walls, but the relentless assault took its toll. The outer defenses, battered beyond repair, were finally breached. English soldiers stormed through the gaps, engaging the surviving Welsh garrison in bloody hand-to-hand combat within the castle's outer courtyards. Yet as the inner wards were about to fall, Dafydd ap Gruffudd made a desperate choice. He would not die a martyr within the stone walls of his last stronghold. Under the cover of darkness, or perhaps the confusion of the final assault, he and a small band of his most loyal men slipped through the English lines and escaped into the surrounding mountains. His flight was not an act of cowardice, but the last calculated move of a man who refused to surrender. The castle itself fell shortly after. Its capture was more than a military victory for Edward. It was a profound symbolic act. Castle Wybera had been the last major castle held by a native Welsh prince, the final piece of the independent Welsh state. Its fall meant that the entire administrative and military structure of the principality was now broken. There were no more strongholds, no more organized armies. The royal house of Gwynedd, the dynasty that had produced Llewellyn the Great and his ill-fated grandson, was now effectively extinct, its last prince a fugitive in his own land. The siege of Castle Wybera marked the final crushing collapse of the dream of a sovereign Wales. Yet even with the last fortress taken, the war was not quite over, for a king's vengeance demands a final, terrible reckoning. The dream of a free Wales did not die with Llewellyn ap Gruffudd. It smoldered in the hearts of a people chafing under the harsh rule of a foreign king. 11 years after the last prince fell, that smoldering anger erupted into a final, desperate fire. The man who lit the fuse was Madog ap Llewellyn, a distant kinsman of the great prince. In the year 1294, with King Edward I distracted by a war in Scotland, Madog saw his chance. He proclaimed himself the new Prince of Wales and called the nation to arms. The response was overwhelming. From Gwynedd in the north to the southern valleys, the Welsh rose up as one, laying siege to English castles and reclaiming their homelands. For a brief, glorious moment, it seemed the conquest had been undone, but Edward was a king who learned from his mistakes. He would not be humbled again. He sent one of his most capable commanders, the Earl of Warwick, to crush the rebellion for good. The two armies met in the rolling hills of mid-Wales at a place called Mies Moedog. The Welsh force, composed largely of spearmen who had proven so effective in the past, stood ready for battle. They expected the English to rely on their traditional strength, a thunderous charge of armored knights. But the Earl of Warwick had devised a new tactic, one that would change the nature of medieval warfare. He ordered his knights to dismount. These men-at-arms, clad head to toe in steel, formed a solid, immovable wall of shields and swords. They became the anvil. Flanking them were massed formations of English longbowmen who would become the hammer. As the Welsh spearmen advanced, they were met not by a cavalry charge they could break, but by a storm of arrows. The English archers loosed volley after volley into the Welsh ranks, their deadly shafts piercing shields and mail. The charge faltered, the lines wavered. Then the disciplined wall of dismounted men-at-arms began its advance, pressing forward step by step, pushing the disorganized Welsh back. It was a tactical masterpiece, a brutal and efficient killing machine. The Welsh army was cut to pieces. The defeat at Mies Moedog was more than a lost battle. It was the end of a dream. The rebellion collapsed. Madog ap Llewellyn, the man who had dared to claim the title of prince, was eventually hunted down and captured, his fate sealed in an English dungeon. This battle was the true final death knell for an independent Wales. Edward's conquest was now absolute, his victory cemented not just by castles, but by a new way of war. The very tactics that won the day at Mies Moedog would later be perfected on the fields of France, a grim legacy of the war that broke Wales. And yet, even in complete subjugation, the story was not quite over, for the memory of what was lost would itself become a weapon for generations yet unborn. The great victories of 1257 did not appear from nowhere. Before the thunderclap of Cymarau, there were smaller, sharper strikes that began to fracture Norman control. That same year, Llewellyn ap Gruffudd turned his attention to the southern lordship of Glamorgan, a region long dominated by its Norman masters. A force of Norman knights and men-at-arms, confident in their local supremacy, marched out to challenge this northern upstart. They met the Welsh army near the River Luffer at a place called Lwchwr. The ground was a mix of marshland and firm ground, terrain that Llewellyn used to perfection. He funneled the Norman advance into a narrow front where their numerical advantage meant nothing. The Welsh spearmen held the line while archers harassed the flanks. The Norman charge, so devastating on an open field, became bogged down and disorganized. It was a clear, decisive defeat. The victory at Lwchwr was a key that unlocked the region. It demonstrated to the local Welsh population that their northern prince was not just a distant figure, but an active liberator. Castles that had seemed permanent suddenly felt vulnerable. Llewellyn could now project his power deep into Glamorgan, rallying new supporters and stretching the Norman defenses to their breaking point, but he was not finished. Shortly after, another English force moved to intercept him, hoping to halt his momentum. The two armies clashed at Coed This was another fierce engagement, another demonstration of Llewellyn's tactical skill and the high morale of his army. Once again, the Welsh forces emerged victorious, scattering their opponents and consolidating their hold on the territory. These two battles, Lwchwr and Coed were not the massive, set-piece confrontations that would come later. They were the crucial, grinding work of a campaign. Each one was a chisel blow against the edifice of Norman power in the south. They proved that Llewellyn could win consistently, not just in his northern heartlands, but deep in enemy territory. This string of successes in a single year built an irresistible momentum. It convinced wavering lords to join his banner and filled his soldiers with a belief in their own invincibility. The stage was now set. The confidence gained from these earlier fights would fuel the army that marched to the triumphs at Llandeilo and the decisive slaughter at Cymarau. While the great river ambush at Moel Dun captured the spotlight, the final war was a fire raging across the entire country. Far from the northern strongholds, smaller, sharper actions demonstrated that the rebellion was a truly national effort. Near the town the English called Builth, a place the Welsh knew as Llanfair Immualt, a significant skirmish unfolded. This was not the climactic battle that would later claim Llewellyn's life, but a fierce prelude. Welsh forces, deeply familiar with the wooded valleys and river crossings, engaged in English patrol or a supply column. They used the classic tactics of guerrilla warfare, striking from concealed positions and then melting back into the landscape. This constant harassment was like death by 1,000 cuts, forcing the English to guard every road and bridge, draining their manpower and slowing their advance to a crawl. It proved that even in regions nominally under English control, the land itself was fighting back. Simultaneously, a much bolder stroke was being planned further east. Abergavenny Castle was a formidable symbol of Norman power, a stone fortress built to dominate the surrounding lordship. Its capture would send a shockwave through the entire march. The Welsh assault was a masterpiece of timing and audacity. They likely moved under cover of darkness, their approach hidden by the terrain. The castle's weakness was not its high walls, but its gatehouse. Imagine a small group of determined men using ropes and ladders to scale the outer defenses under the cloak of night. Or perhaps they used a ruse, disguising themselves as local farmers or traders to get close to the gates before launching a sudden, violent rush. Once inside the outer ward, chaos would have reigned. The garrison, caught completely by surprise in their barracks, would have had little time to don their armor and form a coherent defense. The fighting would have been close, brutal, and personal in the cramped inner courtyards. The fall of Abergavenny was a profound psychological blow. It demonstrated that no English stronghold was safe, no matter how far it was from the northern heartland of the rebellion. These two actions, the skirmish at Llanfair Immualt and the storming of Abergavenny Castle, were critical threads in a larger tapestry. They forced King Edward to fight a war on multiple fronts, stretching his resources and his attention to the breaking point. Every castle he had to recapture, every road he had to secure diverted men, money, and time away from his main objective of crushing Gwynedd. For a few brilliant months, the Welsh revolt looked less like a regional uprising and more like a coordinated national war for independence. The entire country, from the Menai straight to the English border, seemed to be rising as one. This widespread coordination was Llewellyn's greatest political achievement, but it was also a fragile construct, a flame that burned brightly but could be extinguished by a single, crushing defeat. And that defeat was already moving through the winter woods. drawn toward the very town where the first sparks of this southern resistance had flown. A new century dawned, and with it a new hope for Wales. On a crisp September day in the year 1400, in the serene beauty of the Dee Valley, a man named Owain Glyndŵr stood before a gathering of his closest followers. He was a respected Welsh lord, a man of law and military experience, but on that day he became something far greater. He proclaimed himself the true Prince of Wales, a title that had been dormant for over a century. It was an act of breathtaking defiance, a direct challenge to the English crown and its new king, Henry IV. This was not a quiet declaration. It was a call to arms, and it was answered immediately. His small but devoted band of supporters, their hearts burning with a long-suppressed desire for freedom, looked to him as their leader. They did not linger in celebration. They moved with purpose, their first target a symbol of English authority just a day's march away. The town of Ruthin was the seat of one of the most hated English lords in the region, Reginald de Grey. Glyndŵr's force descended upon it not as a massive army, but as a swift and sharp instrument of rebellion. They stormed into the town, setting fire to English properties and clashing with the local garrison. The attack was a shock, a bolt from the blue that sent panic rippling through the marches. It was a statement, loud and clear, that the old order was being challenged. As the smoke rose over Ruthin, Glyndŵr and his men melted back into the landscape, moving northeast toward his own lands near Glyndŵr. They did not have to wait long for a response. An English force led by the young Earl of March was hastily assembled and sent to intercept this upstart prince. The two groups met near the River Dee. What followed was less a grand battle and more a sharp, violent skirmish. It was a chaotic clash of mounted men and archers along the riverbanks, a confused fight where the terrain dictated the flow of the action. Glyndŵr's men, fighting with the ferocity of those who have everything to gain, held their own against the professional soldiers. The encounter at Glyndŵr was small in scale, but its significance was immense. It was the opening shot in a war that would rage for 15 long years. In that first sharp engagement, Owain Glyndŵr proved his audacity was matched by a willingness to fight. He had not just declared a title, he had backed it with steel. He had immediately put King Henry IV on notice that this was no minor border disturbance, but a major rebellion with a leader of courage and conviction. The flame had been lit, and across Wales, people began to whisper that their long-awaited liberator had finally arrived. The fire lit at Glyndŵr was now a raging inferno, and King Henry IV was determined to stamp it out. He dispatched a formidable army into the heart of Wales, led by Sir Edmund Mortimer, a seasoned and powerful marcher lord. Mortimer's mission was clear: to crush Owain Glyndŵr's rebellion with overwhelming force and bring the Welsh to heel. He marched deep into the rolling hills of Powys, his column of knights and men at arms a bristling display of English military might, confident they would scatter the ragtag Welsh forces before them. Glyndŵr, however, was waiting. He chose his ground with the eye of a master tactician, selecting a steep, grassy hill near the village of Pillith, known as Bryn Glas. This was not a place for a chivalrous charge, it was a perfect killing ground. He positioned the core of his army on the high slopes, hidden from view, while his secret weapon, hundreds of Welsh longbowmen, were concealed among the trees and bracken on the flanks. Mortimer's army, confident and advancing uphill, marched directly into the trap. Just as the English vanguard reached the slopes, Glyndŵr gave the signal. The sky darkened as a storm of Welsh arrows arced down from the high ground. The English ranks, caught in the open, had no defense against this plunging fire. Arrows pierced shields and mailed from above, sowing chaos and terror. The disciplined volleys shredded Mortimer's formation, turning his advance into a disorganized mass of panicked men and wounded horses. Then, as the English reeled from the arrow storm, Glyndŵr's main force erupted from their concealed positions and charged down the hill. The impact was devastating. The disoriented English soldiers were driven back into each other, unable to form a coherent line on the steep incline. The battle swiftly turned into a slaughter. In the brutal aftermath, a dark and controversial legend was born. Chroniclers of the time, eager to paint the Welsh as savages, told of Glyndŵr's Welsh women following the army and descending upon the English wounded with knives and stakes. Whether this grisly tale is true or mere propaganda, it underscores the deep personal hatred that fueled this war of independence. The most significant outcome, however, was not the bloodshed but the capture. Sir Edmund Mortimer himself was taken prisoner. King Henry, suspicious of the Mortimer family's own claim to his throne, refused to pay the ransom. This single act of political calculation backfired catastrophically. A bitter and abandoned Mortimer from his captivity made a stunning decision. He threw his lot in with Glyndŵr, sealing the alliance by marrying the Welsh prince's daughter. The victory at Bryn Glas was far more than a military triumph. It was a psychological earthquake that resonated across Wales and England. Glyndŵr was no longer a rebel chieftain. He was a victorious commander who had humiliated a royal army and won over one of England's greatest lords. Welshmen from every corner flocked to his banner, believing that their deliverance was at hand. The dream of an independent Wales, extinguished for over a century, was now ablaze once more. From his capital at Harlech Castle, Owain Glyndŵr ruled a nation reborn. This was no mountain hideout, but one of King Edward I's own magnificent fortresses, a masterpiece of military architecture designed to subdue Wales, now flying the golden dragon of an independent Welsh prince. Its capture had been a crowning achievement, transforming a symbol of oppression into the very heart of the rebellion. Within those formidable walls, Glyndŵr held his first parliament, negotiated alliances with England's greatest nobles, and administered a kingdom that stretched across the land. For a few glorious years, Harlech was more than a castle. It was the soul of a sovereign Wales, but the English crown could not let this stand. In 1409, the noose tightened. A powerful English army, backed by the full resources of the kingdom, arrived at the gates. They did not attempt an immediate, costly assault on the seemingly impregnable walls. Instead, they settled in for a long, grinding siege, building earthworks and fortifications of their own to completely encircle the castle. Their strategy was simple and brutal: to starve the defenders into submission. The siege of Harlech was a slow, agonizing ordeal. Month after month, the garrison and those inside, including Glyndŵr's own family, watched their supplies dwindle. Food became a memory, then a fantasy. The strong walls that had once been their greatest protection became their prison, trapping them with the creeping specter of starvation. Morale, once soaring, began to crumble as hunger gnawed at their resolve. The final English assault, when it came, was likely less a grand battle and more the grim, inevitable conclusion to this long starvation. The defenders, weakened and emaciated, could no longer man the walls effectively. The great gates were battered down or scaled, and English soldiers poured into the inner ward. The fighting was desperate but short-lived. The castle that had been the seat of Welsh government was now a scene of English triumph. The personal tragedy was absolute. In the chaos of the fall, the English captured Glyndŵr's wife, Marged at least 2 of his daughters and several of his young grandchildren. These were not just prisoners of war, they were the royal family of Wales, and their capture was a devastating blow. They were taken to England and imprisoned, their fates becoming a dark mystery. Some would die in captivity, their lives extinguished far from home. The loss of Harlech was more than the loss of a fortress. It was the decapitation of the Welsh state. With his administrative center gone, his family in chains, and his symbol of legitimacy shattered, Glyndŵr's rebellion lost its political core. He would fight on as a fugitive in the hills for years, a spectral figure haunting the land he tried to free. But the dream of a sovereign Wales died within the stone walls of Harlech. The flame of independence, which had burned so brightly, was now reduced to a few scattered embers in the wind. Even as Harlech held firm, the war for Wales was being decided in the south. One of the most significant yet mysterious clashes of Owain Glyndŵr's long rebellion is known as the Battle of Stalling Down. Its story is a puzzle for historians, its exact date and location lost to time, believed to be somewhere in the hills of Glamorgan around the year 1403. We know it happened not from detailed chronicles, but from scattered accounts and the undeniable shift in power that followed. These fragments tell of a major English force, led by the Earl of Somerset, marching to reassert royal control over the turbulent region. And they tell of Glyndŵr's army, likely fighting alongside a crucial new ally, the Tudor family of Penynyd, waiting for them. The Tudors were a rising Welsh dynasty with deep local knowledge and their own ambitions, and their alliance with the prince turned a band of rebels into a legitimate national army. The battle itself is shrouded in the fog of war, but the tactics would have been classic Glyndŵr. The English column, confident and heavy with armored knights, would have been funneled into the kind of terrain where they were most vulnerable, perhaps a narrow valley or a steep wooded slope. The Welsh, using their superior mobility and knowledge of the ground, would have rained arrows down upon the compressed ranks before charging from multiple directions. The result was not a skirmish but a rout. The Earl of Somerset's army was shattered, forced into a humiliating retreat that left the field and the region in Welsh hands. The strategic importance of this victory cannot be overstated. With the English field army in the south destroyed, Glyndŵr solidified his control over Glamorgan and the surrounding lands. This was not a temporary raid, it was the establishment of a new political reality. More importantly, the victory at Stalling Down severed the vital communication and supply lines that connected the English-held Marcher lordships to one another. Each castle and garrison was suddenly isolated, an island in a Welsh sea, unable to support its neighbors or receive help from the east. This single battle demonstrated the truly national scale of the rebellion. The conflict was no longer confined to the mountains of the north. It was a fluid, widespread war raging from coast to coast, proving that the spirit of an independent Wales was alive and well in every valley. The Golden Dragon of Wales now flew alongside the White Lion of the Percys. This unlikely alliance between Owain Glyndŵr and the powerful Percy family of northern England was the rebellion's masterstroke, a pincer movement designed to tear the English kingdom in two. The Percys, led by the fiery Henry Hotspur Percy, had their own bitter grievances against King Henry IV, whom they felt had failed to reward their loyalty. They raised their standard in open revolt and marched south. Their plan hinged on a crucial rendezvous. They were counting on Glyndŵr's Welsh army to join them, combining their forces to crush the king between them. Glyndŵr began his march eastward from Wales, his goal the town of Shrewsbury, where the two armies would unite, but the Welsh columns never arrived. The reason remains one of the great what-ifs of history. Some accounts suggest Glyndŵr was deliberately slow, cautious of committing to a pitched battle so far from his mountainous heartland. Others point to a more practical obstacle. English forces under the Earl of March were actively harrying his line of march, forcing delays and detours that cost him those critical days. Whatever the cause, the result was a catastrophe. The Percy army, waiting in vain for their Welsh allies, found themselves isolated and facing the full wrath of King Henry's royal army just outside Shrewsbury. The battle that followed was a brutal, chaotic melee, but it is remembered for one terrifying innovation. This was the first time in English history that two large forces, both equipped with the legendary longbow, faced each other on the field. The result was a storm of arrows unlike anything seen before. Volleys of yard-long shafts darkened the sky, cutting down men and horses on both sides with horrific efficiency. The air itself seemed to scream with the sound of their flight. In the midst of this carnage, the rebellion's hope died a second time. Henry Hotspur Percy, believing he saw King Henry and hoping to end the battle with a single heroic charge, led his men directly into the heart of the royal lines. It was a desperate gamble and it cost him everything. Hotspur was struck down and killed, his death scattering the morale of his army. The Percy revolt was shattered. For Owain Glyndŵr, watching from a distance or learning the news days later, the defeat at Shrewsbury was a disaster of incalculable scale. He had lost his most powerful English ally, a man who could have divided the king's attention and resources indefinitely. With the Percy threat eliminated, Henry IV was now free to turn his undivided fury and his entire military machine toward one objective, the utter destruction of the Welsh rebellion. The hope of toppling the English crown died on that field near Shrewsbury, and Glyndŵr's war for independence was forced onto the defensive, a fight for survival against a king who no longer had to look over his shoulder. The Grand Alliance was now a fading dream, and the English response was growing sharper and more brutal. The year 1405 was meant to be Glyndŵr's zenith, the moment his tripartite indenture with the Percys and Mortimers would carve up the kingdom of England itself. But with the Percys crushed at Shrewsbury, that bold vision was already crumbling. Yet the war went on, and in the early spring, a large Welsh army, led by Owain's own son Gruffydd and his brother Tudur, pushed into the fertile lands of Gwent. Their target was the strategic town of Grosmont, a key English stronghold. Capturing it would secure the region and prove the rebellion's vitality. The Welsh force fell upon the town, their assault fierce and determined, setting buildings ablaze and driving the garrison back. For a moment it seemed another victory was at hand, but the English were no longer caught off guard. A young, brilliant, and ruthless commander was in the region, Prince Henry, the future King Henry V. He moved with shocking speed. While the Welsh were occupied with the sack of Grosmont, Prince Henry led a flying column of English men-at-arms and archers in a surprise counterattack. He did not wait for a formal battle line. He hit the Welsh forces while they were dispersed and unprepared. The result was a massacre. The disciplined English charge shattered the Welsh formations. Gruffydd ap Owain was severely wounded and barely escaped with his life. His uncle, Tudur ap Gruffydd Glyndŵr, was not so fortunate. He was captured on the field. The Welsh army was routed, cut down as they fled, with chronicles claiming 1,000 lives lost. The defeat was a catastrophic blow, not just for the lives lost, but for the morale shattered. Just days later, another Welsh force was smashed at Usk in a similarly brutal engagement. The twin defeats at Grosmont and Usk broke the back of Glyndŵr's campaign in the south. They demonstrated a terrifying new reality. The English had learned to fight the Welsh War. No longer would they be lured into ambushes in the hills. Instead, they used rapid, aggressive strikes led by commanders who understood the need for relentless, mobile warfare. The capture of his brother Tudur, a trusted commander and family pillar, was a personal wound from which Owain Glyndŵr would never fully recover. The rebellion's high tide had finally definitively begun to recede, leaving behind a bitter legacy of what might have been. The disaster at Grosmont was not an isolated event, but the first crack in a dam that was about to burst. Just days later, the English army under Prince Henry and Lord Grey of Codnor struck again, finding a second Welsh force regrouping in the woods near Usk at a place called Pwll Melyn, the Yellow Pool. This time there would be no surprise, no chance for escape. The English, now infused with the confidence of their recent victory, moved to encircle the Welsh position. The fighting that erupted was some of the most savage of the entire rebellion. It was a close-quarters melee in the dense woodland, a brutal struggle of sword and spear where the undergrowth was slick with blood. The Welsh fought with the desperation of cornered men, but the English momentum was unstoppable. They pressed their advantage, tightening the noose and cutting down the defenders where they stood. The cost was catastrophic for the Welsh cause. Among the dead was Glyndŵr's brother, Tudur ap Gruffydd, a seasoned leader and a pillar of the rebellion. But the most devastating loss was yet another of the prince's sons. His eldest, Gruffydd ap Owain Glyndŵr, was captured on the field. He was not ransomed or exchanged, but taken in chains to the Tower of London, where he would later die a prisoner, his life and potential extinguished in a cold English dungeon. The twin hammer blows of Grosmont and Pwll Melyn shattered the rebellion in the south. In the span of a few weeks, Glyndŵr had lost a brother, seen one son grievously wounded and another captured forever, and witnessed the destruction of his most experienced field armies. The initiative, so carefully built over years of campaigning, was ripped from his hands and passed irrevocably to the English crown. The heart of the uprising was now bleeding out, its best commanders gone, its hope for the future imprisoned behind stone walls. The dream of a Wales reborn was receding into a long, grim nightmare of retreat and survival. Coedy Castle stood as a stubborn island of English defiance in a sea of Welsh rebellion. While Owain Glyndŵr's banners flew over much of Glamorgan, this formidable fortress, held by the loyal and tenacious Sir Lawrence Berkerolles, refused to yield. For most of a year, from 1404 into 1405, Glyndŵr's forces laid siege to its stone walls. This was not a war of dramatic charges, but a grueling test of endurance fought with shovels and starvation. The attackers would have tried to storm the walls with ladders, only to be met with boiling water and arrows from the battlements. They likely attempted mining, digging tunnels deep beneath the foundations to collapse a section of the wall, while the defenders frantically dug counter mines to intercept them. Above all, the siege was a relentless blockade, a strategy of isolation meant to choke the life from the garrison. The goal was to wait until the food ran out and the will of the defenders broke. Yet Sir Lawrence and his men held on, surviving on dwindling rations and the faint hope of relief. The successful defense of Coedy and other key fortresses like it proved critically important. While Glyndŵr captured many castles, these held strongpoints acted as anchors for the English crown. They were permanent bases nestled deep inside rebel territory, pockets of resistance that never fully submitted. When the rebellion's momentum finally began to falter after the disasters at Grosmont and Usk, it was from these stubborn footholds that the English resurgence was launched. The king's men did not have to reconquer Wales from scratch. They simply marched out from castles that had never truly been lost, ready to reclaim a land that was already weary from years of conflict. The fall of Aberystwyth Castle was a slow, methodical death for a dream. Perched on a rocky headland overlooking Cardigan Bay, this was no ordinary fortress. It was one of Edward I's mighty iron rings, a masterpiece of concentric stone walls designed to project English power deep into Wales. Yet since 1404, its towers had flown the golden dragon of Owain Glyndŵr, transformed from a tool of conquest into the very seat of a Welsh parliament. Its capture had been a crowning achievement, but its defense would become a final, desperate testament. In 1407, the full might of the English crown descended upon it, led by the same Prince Henry who had shattered Welsh armies at Grosmont and Usk. His strategy was a grim lesson in modern siegecraft. He did not merely surround the landward walls, he brought a fleet to blockade the sea, cutting off the last slender thread of supply and reinforcement. The castle was now an island completely isolated. Then came the guns. This was a new sound in the Welsh Wars, the deep, percussive thunder of cannon. These were not the graceful arcs of trebuchet stones, but the direct, brutal impact of iron shot hammering against ancient stone. Day after day, the bombardment continued, systematically reducing sections of the proud walls to rubble. Inside, the Welsh garrison and the townspeople who had sought refuge with them endured a special kind of hell. They were trapped between the relentless artillery and the creeping horror of starvation. They watched their food stores vanish, their hopes fading with each passing week, yet they held on through 1407 and into the bitter winter of 1408. Their resistance was a miracle of sheer will, but we cannot stop a cannonball or fill an empty stomach. When the end came, it was not a glorious last stand, but the quiet, grim necessity of surrender. The gates were opened, the dragon banner hauled down. The loss of Aberystwyth was a strategic catastrophe. It was the second of Glyndŵr's capital castles to fall, following the capture of Harlech. With it, he lost his last major administrative center, his last symbol of legitimate princely rule. The map of his Wales was shrinking, its heart being torn out one fortress at a time. There would be no more parliaments, no more royal proclamations. The man who had been a sovereign prince was now a fugitive in his own land, his war for independence reduced to a scattered and increasingly hopeless guerrilla struggle in the mountains. The dream of a nation was being buried under the rubble of its own greatest strongholds. The great castles had fallen, but the war was not yet over. By 1407, Owain Glyndŵr was no longer a prince holding court in stone halls. He was a phantom moving through the misty hills of Powys. His rebellion had entered its final, most elusive phase, a shadow war fought not by armies but by partisans. This period is a historian's nightmare, a time when official records dry up and the story fragments into local legends and whispered accounts. The grand chronicles of kings have little to say about the small, sharp clashes that defined these years, making every scrap of evidence a precious clue to a forgotten struggle. It is from this fog of history that a single engagement emerges, known only as the Battle of the Shelley Moor. The details are sparse but telling. A Welsh force, likely a band of local men who knew every sheep track and hidden valley, lay in wait along a known English supply route. Their target was not a fortress, but a vulnerable patrol or a column of wagons carrying vital food and weapons to an English garrison. The ambush was a classic of guerrilla warfare, a sudden, violent strike from concealed positions. Arrows would have flown first, cutting down the escort before the Welsh charged in with spear and sword, seizing the supplies and vanishing back into the landscape before any significant relief force could arrive. This was the new reality of the Welsh War. Without castles or open fields to hold, Glyndŵr's strategy became one of absolute mobility. His forces were like shadows, striking where the English were weakest and then dissolving into the countryside. They relied on the support of the local population for food, intelligence, and shelter, a network of silent loyalty that no English army could ever completely dismantle. A victory at the Shelley Moor was meaningless in the grand strategic sense. It would not win back a single castle, but its true value was in the constant, grinding frustration it inflicted on the English occupiers. How to defeat an enemy you cannot find, an enemy who is everywhere and nowhere at once. Every patrol was a potential target, every supply line a risk. The psychological toll on the English was immense, a constant state of alertness in a hostile land. For the Welsh people, these small triumphs were embers of hope, proof that their prince still fought and that the spirit of resistance lived on, even as the dream of ultimate victory slowly faded into the Highland mists. The phantom war in the hills could not last forever. By 1412, Owain Glyndŵr's world had shrunk to the misty valleys of his native Powys, his army reduced to a small, devoted band of followers who moved like ghosts through the landscape they knew so well. Their fight was no longer for castles or crowns, but for the very idea of resistance itself. The last documented military action of the rebellion was a final, fleeting spark. It was a small-scale ambush, likely against an English patrol or supply train near the English border. There were no chroniclers to record its details, no grand name given to the clash. It was simply another sharp, violent strike from the shadows, a last reminder that the Prince of Wales still breathed and could still sting, then silence. After that final, minor engagement in 1412, the most wanted man in Britain simply vanished from the pages of history. Owain Glyndŵr was never captured. He never surrendered. He did not die in battle where any could bear witness. He and his closest followers seemed to dissolve into the very air of the Welsh mountains, leaving behind no trail for his relentless pursuers to follow. This disappearance was not an ending. It was the birth of a profound and enduring mystery. Where did he go? Did he die of illness, hidden in a remote cave? Did he slip away to live out his days in quiet anonymity, perhaps with a daughter in England? Or did he simply walk into the mist, becoming one with the land he fought to free? The void he left was instantly filled with legend. People whispered that he was not truly gone, only sleeping, waiting for the right moment to return. He became inextricably linked to the ancient prophecy of the Mab Darogan, the son of prophecy, a messianic figure destined to one day lead the Welsh to their promised victory. His evasion of capture became a more powerful symbol than any battlefield triumph could ever be. In a war defined by the fall of stone fortresses, his ultimate victory was his own invisibility. He had denied King Henry the one thing the king wanted most, the spectacle of his captured enemy, humiliated and paraded in chains. By disappearing, Glyndŵr ensured that the English crown could never truly claim to have extinguished the spirit of Wales. He left behind not a corpse but a question, and in that question, the hope for a free Wales lived on, waiting for the sound of a trumpet that has yet to be heard. Across 3 centuries, the struggle for Wales unfolded as a saga of brilliant victories and crushing defeats, a testament to the resilience of a people and their land. From the dynastic triumph at Myned Carn that forged a unified front, to the breathtaking ambushes at Crugmawr and Coleshill that humbled kings, the Welsh proved themselves masters of their own rugged terrain. They turned mountains into fortresses and forests into traps, using the very landscape as their most powerful weapon. The rise of Llewellyn the Great and his grandson, Llewellyn ap Gruffudd, brought Wales to the very brink of recognized sovereignty, a dream sealed in the Treaty of Montgomery. Yet that dream was shattered in a winter skirmish near Builthwells, a moment that proved how fragile a nation's fate can be. The fiery resurgence under Owain Glyndŵr showed that the spirit of independence could not be so easily extinguished, burning brightly for 15 years before finally being smothered by the overwhelming force of the English crown. Through it all, the story of these wars is defined by the immense challenge of subduing a mountainous country and the power of charismatic leaders to rally a nation. Though the swords fell silent and the castles were occupied, the legacy of these 30 battles was not written in stone, but in the soul of a people. The memory of defiance, of princes who fought and a people who rose again and again, became the very bedrock of Welsh national identity, a story of resistance that echoes through the ages. Which of these battles did you find most fascinating? Do you think the outcome could have been different if a single arrow had flown a different path, or a single alliance had held firm? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into history's greatest conflicts.